The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised.
Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
Where strange lights speed beyond reason across a clear night sky.
The house at the end of the road where disembodied voices whisper and strange noises make the living shiver.
Lurking shadows hiding on the edge of the woods just outside your back door.
Odd, true events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole. I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. I'm Wes, and that's my wife and co-host, Beth.
Hello, everyone.
Well, I think we have all our Halloween decor up. It's been so much fun dressing up all our skeletons. And the place has a nice, spooky Victorian vibe going on.
And we have more skeletons than people.
Well, you don't have to feed them, and they don't require any special attention. So they're the perfect house guest. So, where did your mind wander for this episode, Beth?
My mind wandered to France. Are you ready?
Oh, I'm all in. Let's go.
All right. The Monnier family of Poitiers, France, was very well-to-do in 1876. Émile Monnier, who died in 1879, was the director of the Poitiers Arts Faculty. Madame Louise Monnier received an award from the Committee of Good Works for her financial contributions to the city. Their son Marcel was a very successful lawyer. He was married and had one daughter. And Émile and Louise's 25-year-old daughter, Blanche, was an absolute beauty with long, dark hair. By all accounts, the Monniers were high society and well respected. When Émile died, however, it became imperative that Blanche find a husband to continue the family's lifestyle. Blanche looked, and she found love. The only problem was that her chosen mate was a lawyer, and not a rich one. Mama wasn't too pleased, calling him penniless and unworthy. Madame Monnier was quite strict, it seems. She was quick to punish and expected both of her children to follow the rules. You could say she ran her household with an iron fist.
I don't think I like Mama's attitude.
Well, neither did Blanche. So, of course, Blanche and the lawyer never married because, inexplicably, Blanche vanished. Now, you might be wondering if Blanche and her lawyer ran off to get married and the family hid the fact, claiming she had just disappeared. But they did not. In fact, her mother and brother never officially explained Blanche's disappearance at all, and they eventually mourned her as though she had died. The townsfolk found it odd, but also tragic, that such a beautiful young woman could have just vanished. But time marched on for 25 years. On May 23, 1901, French authorities received an anonymous tip in a letter which read, quote, Monsieur Attorney General, I have the honor to inform you of an exceptionally serious occurrence. I speak of a spinster who is locked up in Madame Monnier's house, half-starved, and living on a putrid litter for the past 25 years. In a word, in her own filth. End quote.
25 years?
Yes.
That's incredible.
At first, authorities doubted the authenticity of the letter. Perhaps a disgruntled servant was seeking revenge on the family. But they also recalled the tragic disappearance of Blanche and decided to investigate. When they arrived at the home, Madame Monnier refused to let them in. But undeterred, the police forced their way in. And what they found was truly horrifying. First, the stench. One report read, quote, As soon as light entered the room, we noticed in the back, lying on a bed, her head and body covered by a repulsively filthy blanket. The air was so unbreathable, the odor given off by the room was so rank that it was impossible for us to stay any longer to proceed with our investigation, end quote. But they knew they must, because Blanche Monnier had been imprisoned in a windowless, lightless room for 25 years.
I knew it. Mama is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs.
For half her life, Blanche had slept, ate, urinated, and defecated in the same unchanged straw mattress bed in an attic room. She was never allowed to bathe. The food she was given was simply leftover table scraps from the family's meals. They also refused to let her wear clothes. She was surrounded by filth and the animals it attracts, bugs and rats. Her walls were covered in words and phrases she had written pertaining to freedom. She weighed just 55 pounds and was unable to speak.
That's sickening.
So why was she locked up for 25 years? Because Madame Monnier had ordered her daughter to break off her relationship with the lawyer all those years ago, but Blanche had refused. Enraged, Madame told her she could leave her room when she agreed to marry someone other than the man she loved. But how did the Monnier family, Louise and Blanche's brother Marcel, keep her captivity a secret from a household of servants? They didn't. Many speculate that the servants had to know, but were so afraid of their mistress that they said nothing. And what about the neighbors? Reportedly, some of them knew too, as they often heard her screaming in her room. If anyone ever asked Madame Monnier about it, she would admit that Blanche's disappearance was really due to Blanche's mental state, that the girl had, quote, gone insane and needed to be locked away in the house for everyone's safety. This was pretty accepted practice in the late 1800s, and so the neighbors let it go.
Oh my God, that poor girl. How the hell can anyone justify not saying something? I imagine they could have done it anonymously, way before, waiting for 25 years. But to do nothing? These people make me sick.
Yeah, it's pretty awful. In fact, Madame Monnier and Marcel justified their actions to the police by claiming Blanche was, quote, foul, angry, overly excited, and full of rage, end quote, saying her extreme isolation was necessary. When she was found, Blanche was immediately taken to the hospital, and to the staff's surprise, she was quite lucid after being able to breathe fresh air. She wasn't angry, overly excited, or full of rage at all. Quite the opposite. She was calm and happy when nurses gave her a bath. Eventually, she regained some of her speech, although she only uttered short phrases. The psychological toll on Blanche was so great, though, that she lived out the rest of her life at a psychiatric hospital until 1913, when she passed away at age 64. Her beloved lawyer had passed away in 1885, 10 years into her imprisonment.
Oh, that's bullshit. She was robbed of her life. If there is a higher power, I hope these people all got what they deserved.
Well, not so much. So Madame Monnier was arrested immediately. She confessed to everything, but since she was in her mid-70s and in poor health, the police transferred her to a medical unit within the prison. She died just 15 days later, but not before altering her will so that Blanche's care would be paid for. Her last words allegedly were, "My poor Blanche." Marcel was tried in her place. He insisted that he had tried numerous times to intervene, but his mother insisted on keeping Blanche locked up. Marcel was sentenced to 15 months in prison, but appealed the ruling. He claimed that he never physically abused his sister and had tried to make her life as comfortable as possible. He also said that Blanche could have left her confinement at any time, but she chose not to. The French court decided that Marcel was not responsible for the act of confining her, and therefore the initial ruling was overturned, and Marcel was set free. The townsfolk of Poitiers, however, were enraged by this ruling, and Marcel was forced to send his own family into hiding to escape an angry mob.
Wow. I'm enraged, and I wasn't even there. Marcel and his mama should have been, hung from the rafters.
Well, I find the ending to this story really interesting because at first I thought it was odd that Blanche's mother's alleged last words were, "My poor Blanche," because, she also set it up that Blanche's medical needs would be covered. So I couldn't figure out if it was because she was truly remorseful for what she'd done or if it was just like a cruel last thing to say. But then when I looked at the fact that Marcel was found innocent and that he claimed that Blanche could have left her confinement at any time, something it doesn't add up for me. Like, you would think that if he was trying to dodge the blame, he would have said that he didn't know what was going on or he was afraid of his mother. But saying that she could leave at any time just doesn't make sense. If she was imprisoned because she refused to marry someone her mother picked out for her, you wouldn't think they would have kept her confined for 25 years.
Well, I think he was just saying that to justify him not standing up to his mommy because he was too afraid of probably being cut off from his inheritance.
Well, maybe. So, to be fair, I did try to dig a little bit deeper because I personally just really felt like there was more to this story. And I did find a theory that Blanche herself secluded herself in her room and refused to eat out of religious fervor, and that it had nothing to do with a man. The theory said that, she may have had mental health issues to begin with, and her family didn't know how to deal with it, and they didn't want her institutionalized, and they tried to care for her at home. But when I tried to look up the court hearings or to validate the theory with other sources, they were all in French, and they did not have translate to English buttons on the websites, and I don't read French, so I couldn't really get any further. But my gut says there may be much, much more to this story.
Yes, I think perhaps so.
Hey, did you know? 16th century Austrian mayor Hans Steininger was known for his 4-foot-long beard, which he used to roll up and stuff in his pocket. One day, a fire broke out, and in a hurry to get out of the building, he forgot to roll it up and tuck it away. Steininger tripped over his facial hair and fell down a flight of stairs, which killed him. Today, what's left of Steininger's lethal beard can be seen in an Austrian museum. Who'da thunk it? So, what are you going to talk about this evening?
Well, tonight I'm talking about the Flannan Isle lighthouse disappearance. At times I envy the life of a lighthouse keeper. You're on your own. No one can bother you.
Yes, you've mentioned this to me before.
Yes, just you and your family, if you have one, living on a small island or a secluded patch of land. It can seem like a carefree life, but then there is the reality, the harshness of winter, the isolation and the loneliness, the dire importance of your job, the times you must wait for supplies or hope to see a doctor arrive when someone is ill.
All those stairs.
That too. And then there is the reality that when something goes very, very wrong, your story might be lost to history and the truth may never be known. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse sits on Eilean Moor, one of the Flannan Isles off the coast of northern Scotland. Since the very beginning, Eilean Moor seemed like an island filled with strange happenings. The only living inhabitants were sheep, and the only other building was a chapel built in the 7th century. Locals would bring the sheep over to graze, but none were willing to spend the night because they believed a dark spirit or fairies haunted the island. The chapel was rarely, if ever, used. Legend has it that visitors to the island would feel compelled to circle the chapel ruins on their knees.
Oh, why?
I have no idea why, but in a nutshell, the locals avoided it. What?
Just the way you answered me made me laugh. I'm sorry.
Oh. The lighthouse itself was only a year old in the year of 1900 and manned by 2 keepers. The principal keeper, James Ducat, age 43, and Thomas Marshall, age 40. Donald MacArthur, who was 28, was also there as sort of substitute. He was considered an occasional lightkeeper, who came to sub in for keepers who were ill. The usual third keeper, William Ross, had left the isle on sick leave. On December 26, 1900, the Hesperus, a boat captained by James Harvey, approached the lighthouse with a replacement keeper. It was a scheduled rotation of keepers, and even though bad weather had postponed the arrival of the boat, the 3 men on Eileen Moore would have been expecting the boat. Harvey was already alerted that something could be amiss. There was a report a few days earlier that the lighthouse lamp was out, and it had caused the captain of another boat some distress.
Uh-oh.
But as the boat prepared to dock, they were perplexed to find that no one was waiting to meet them, and none of the usual preparations made for docking. Even the flagstaff was bare. They blew their whistle and set off a flare, but no one came to help them dock. Growing extremely concerned, Harvey convinced the replacement keeper, Joseph Moore, to row to shore. Alone, he climbed the 148 feet of stairs up the steep island cliff to the lighthouse itself. He must have expected to find at least one of the 3 men inside, but what he did find was extremely disturbing. The kitchen table was set as if in the middle of a halted meal. Plates were set out, heaped with meat, potatoes, and pickles. One of the chairs was overturned, as if one of the keepers had leapt to his feet, and the clocks were all stopped.
Oh, that's not good.
Although the lamp appeared ready for lighting, it never had been, and strangely, 2 of the 3 coats were gone from the pegs, meaning one of the men had gone out into the December chill air without a coat, because the lighthouse itself was completely empty. So only explanation was that all 3 men must be outside on the relatively small island somewhere. Eileen Moore encompasses 43 acres, but keep in mind there are no other buildings besides the ruins, of the small chapel, and there are no trees. It's just this wild, craggy plateau of a mountain island. There wouldn't be anywhere to hide. Moore returned to the boat and returned with other crew members to start searching, but to no avail. Marshall, Ducat, and MacArthur were just gone. It was as if the 3 men had just simply vanished, and an investigation was held, of course. The Northern Lighthouse Board Superintendent, Robert Muirhead, arrived on Eileen Moore on December 29th. He knew all 3 keepers personally and had actually seen them on December 7th when he had stopped by the island for a routine check. He immediately examined the logbooks and found himself more perplexed than ever. It was true that a major storm had blown through the area. It had delayed the Hesperus from coming out to the lighthouse in the first place, but that storm had begun on December 17th. The logbook made no sense at all. Marshall's logbook stated that on December 12th, severe winds like the likes of which I have never seen before in 20 years ravaged the island. He also wrote that Ducat had been very quiet and MacArthur had been crying. Based on what people knew of MacArthur, he was a tough, no-nonsense seafarer. This was really odd, but no explanation was given for why he had been crying. The following entry, dated December 13th, was even stranger still. Marshall noted that all 3 men had been praying. Since the lighthouse was brand new and no storms were reported anywhere in the area, the question remains as to why such a savage storm was just over Eileen Moore, and how could it be so fearsome that all 3 seasoned keepers felt the need to pray? The last entry was made on December 15th. Marshall wrote, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all." Now, remember, the storm that had held off Hesperus hadn't hit until 2 days later.
That's weird. So this horrendous storm had occurred only directly over this tiny island.
Yes.
How close is it to the mainland?
32 kilometers or almost 20 miles.
So that's not very far. A storm that bad wouldn't have petered out before people on the mainland would have recorded it, right?
Yes, that's true. It was noted on that day that all their duties were performed and all preparations were made to light the lamp that evening, but they never did. Muir had continued his investigation, but it seems he had more questions than answers. Had all three men left their posts at the same time? This would have been a huge breach of protocol. If all three had gone outdoors, why had one of them left their coat behind? And as the investigators spanned out over the island, they did discover that the western slope had been heavily damaged, including the landing platform. Ropes had become untethered from a supply crate, and other damage reached as high as 200 feet above sea level. But there is no way to tell if the damage had occurred during the storm that began on the 17th or during the phantom storm that Marshall had logged. In the end, Muirhead's official report was that he believed the three lighthouse keepers had gone out into the storm during the 12th to the 15th. You know, the storm that no one else seemed to have witnessed in the area, and attempted to secure the damaged supply crate. All three must have somehow fallen into the sea and drowned. Perhaps one of them had fallen first, and the other two attempted to rescue him. Muirhead didn't speculate, but that was his only conclusion. But is this what really happened?
Did they ever find their bodies?
No, no bodies were ever found.
Huh.
So let's go back to the folklore of the island itself. Eileen Moore was steeped in fairy legend, and there was the dark presence of energy that the locals were afraid of. Many believed that building the lighthouse angered the island's spirits, and it was them who had caused the phantom storm. It might also explain the strange behavior of the two men. Ducat being very quiet and MacArthur crying. It might also explain why all three men felt the need to pray throughout the day on December 13th. Or what about a less supernatural explanation? It's been suggested that Marshall's logbook entries were a complete falsification, that he made them up in order to cover up something more nefarious. But what? MacArthur was said to be somewhat of a hothead. He had been described as a volatile and a bit of a brawler. Was he to blame for their interrupted dinner and overturned chair in the kitchen? Was one of the keepers murdered? I think the real question is whether the damage to the island was done before or after the strange logbook entries. If the damage was done after, then we have even less of an idea what might have happened. Something made the three men get up from their dinner and leave that lighthouse. Something made it impossible for any of them to return and light the lamp that night. Or, now I'm really going down the rabbit hole. What if there was only one lighthouse keeper as of December 15th? What if, knowing that Hesperus would be there any day, one keeper had staged it to look like all three of them were still alive, setting 3 plates, knocking over 1 chair, leaving 1 coat? Could it have been an attempt at some sort of bait and switch cover-up? And knowing he would have been found out sooner or later, he had purposely fallen into the sea?
Oh, interesting. So a whole killed them off and then made it look like he didn't scenario.
Well, the thing is, we probably will never know. And as a side note, the replacement keeper, James Moore, had to stay at the lighthouse for 2 nights, completely alone, just to get the lamp relit and functional. It is said that he swore he heard men's voices calling his name both nights.
Oh, that's creepy. You know, that's my favorite kind of story, though, so I'm so glad you shared it. Because, I mean, I always feel bad for the families in these types of stories because they never found out what happened to their family members. But stories like this just make me really appreciate all the historians and researchers and detectives out there that They dedicate their whole lives to trying to find the answer. And I just really appreciate that. And I want to know what happened.
Yeah, I would love to actually, know what happened also. I think, being on the island for a while, that perhaps something nefarious did happen. And it's so easy just to dispose of a body out into the ocean.
Right.
But we're never going to know.
Well, maybe we will. Don't give up hope. We might someday, thanks to all those historians and researchers and people that keep at it.
It could happen. But I don't think we're ever going to know. Well, I guess that about wraps it up for this episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
Yes, I guess so. We will see you all next week for another new episode. We look forward to traveling with you again to the places where our minds wander.
If you like what you heard, please take a moment and provide us with a 5-star rating and a comment. It really helps us move up the list so people can find us.
See you next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.